This problem states a company constructs a building for its own use. Construction began on January 1st and ended on December 30th. The expenditures for construction were as follows. January 1st, we had $500,000. March 31st, $600,000. June 30th, $400,000. October 30th, $600,000. To help finance the construction, the company arranged a 7% construction loan on January 1st for $700,000, so it was outstanding for the full year. The company's other borrowings outstanding for the whole year consisted of $3 million loan and a $5 million loan with interest rates of 8% and 6% respectively. Assuming the company uses specific interest method, calculate the amount of interest capitalized for the year. Okay, so to do this, our first step is to calculate the average accumulated expenditures. So on 1/1, we had expenditures of $500,000. That's pulled from right here. Right? We're going to multiply that for the number of months that it was outstanding, that fraction out of 12 months, and it was 12 over 12. This produces for us $500,000. On 3/31, we had expenditures of $600,000. This was then outstanding for 9 months. Produces for us $450,000. On June 30th, we had $400,000. Again, I'm just pulling these from right over here, right? And that was outstanding for 6 months then. And then finally on October 30th, we had $600,000. And that was outstanding then for 2 months. We'll sum these expenditures together. This gives us our weighted average expenditures of $1.25 million. Now that we have this, we're then going to apply the specific interest method. The specific interest method says that we have a construction loan dedicated specifically to cover these expenditures for our self-constructed asset. The construction loan was for $700,000. So for up to $700,000, we're going to capitalize at that specific interest rate. So we had a total amount of $1.25. We'll have $700,000 of that $1.25 is going to be capitalized at, or the interest is at 7%. This is $49,000. That leaves us with a total amount of $550,000 that we then need to calculate with a weighted average interest rate. So our weighted average interest rate would be on the remaining amount of debt that we have. So we have a debt of $3 million and $5 million over here. So we have $3 million. This is outstanding for the full year, so we'll multiply this by our 8%, which is the interest rate they provide for us right here. And then we'll take $5 million and multiply that by its interest rate of 6%. Again, that's given to us right here. This gives us amount of interest of $240,000 and $300,000. Sum these up to give us a total of $540,000. We'll then take this and divide by the total principal that we have, which is $8 million. So we'll have $540,000 divided by $8 million as our principal. And this gives us a weighted average interest rate of 6.75%. We're not including the construction loan because we've already utilized that specific loan, that specific interest method, utilized that for the $700,000. So the remaining $550,000 is going to be at the 6.75% interest rate, and this gives us a total amount of $37,125. We'll sum these up. This gives us a total of $86,125 as our total amount of interest. Now, note, we would then compare to the ceiling for the amount of interest that was incurred, but we know just from calculating the weighted average interest method here, or at least the weighted average interest portion for the remaining outstanding debt, that we've incurred $540,000 in interest. So we're nowhere near the ceiling cap. Therefore, we can record the total $86,125. The second problem included here is BE 1015. BE 1015 asks us to do the same problem, but instead use a total weighted average method. So we're going to use the same information that we had here, and namely our biggest sort of efficiency is we're going to utilize this 1.25 million in terms of weighted average expenditures, but we're going to do so with a single interest rate that's going to be a weighted average interest rate. To do that, I'm going to change colors real quick, and we're going to calculate the weighted average interest by taking the 700,000 and we'll multiply that by 7%. Notice that this was outstanding for the entire time, and we're including the 700,000 now because we're not specifically identifying that construction loan as a portion of the weighted average expenditures. We're including it, grouping it all together with all other debt. So we have the $3 million here, and this was at 8%, and we have $5 million, and this was at 6%. We already calculated the amounts here for the 8% and the 5%, so we'll drop those in again, 240,000 and 300,000. The 7% would then be 49,000. We'll sum all these up. This gives us a total of 589,000. We'll sum up the principal that we have here, which is 8.7 million. We'll then calculate the weighted average interest rate, which is 589 divided by our 8,700. And this gives us 6.77% as our weighted average interest rate. We're then going to take this and multiply it by our weighted average expenditures. We calculated 1.25. That doesn't change from the previous problem. We'll multiply this by 6.77%. So the amount of interest that we'll record is $84,625. Notice that this doesn't come even close to the cap of the amount of actual interest that we've incurred. So the amount that we will record is $84,625.